Wailord, one of the biggest Pokemon in existence, has had an interesting few years. There are definitely other Pokemon out there that are technically longer and heavier than Wailord, but being based on the largest existing animal in the real world, Wailord is a certified big boy. But you might not know that from the recent video games. There's been a strange fascination with the size of Wailord in 3D Pokemon games ever since Sword and Shield, even though this technically goes back to X and Y. Well, really we'd better start in Ruby and Sapphire where Wailord made its debut, a Pokemon measuring about 47 feet or 14.5 meters. This dude is absolutely massive, and even then comes up shorter than a blue whale in our real world. In the original pixel-based games, we never really got to see the sheer size of it. It made sense here because of the smaller system and size of the battlefield to basically just have it the same size as every other Pokemon. These games were always meant to be a little representation of the world of Pokemon because things like the anime would always show just how big a Pokemon really was. And meanwhile on the GameCube, games like Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness had the capacity to represent this Pokemon at its true size. Really, that was the purpose of Pokemon Colosseum, to serve as supplemental material to Generation 3 and allow us to experience battles in 3D on a home console. In the 3DS games, Wailord was still downsized during battles and nothing really manifested from that. Mostly I think everyone had accepted this as a compromise due to hardware limitations and making things easy. Also, I don't think enough people really cared about Wailord, unfortunately, though at least there was that really cool Wailord ship in the Seafolk Village. But once the main series Pokemon games had finally made their way to the home console on the Nintendo Switch, Wailord was still small, with Sword and Shield even utilizing giant Pokemon as a core mechanic, and this also being the time everyone started airing every little grievance with Game Freak. Wailord's size was at the forefront of discussion. He must have felt so embarrassed. And I will admit that here it definitely looks the goofiest, because during battle we rotate all around this large battlefield and Wailord barely takes up any of it. We did get to see a full-sized Wailord in the Isle of Armor DLC as an overworld spawn. I feel like this was basically Game Freak saying, okay fine, here you go. But I did really love the Wailord in the Isle of Armor. I think it was so fun, especially seeing everybody's reactions to it. Oh shoot, the Wailord's there. In my copy of Sword version, is the Wailord supposed to respawn? Because I accidentally ran into Wailord in my copy of Sword and it has never respawned. I've seen some people say that it respawns, but mine has not. Literally after 2 years in Sword, my Wailord has not respawned. Is something supposed to happen? Personally, I don't think Pokemon need to be fully to scale at every point in the game. I'm very understanding of needing the occasional Pokemon to be a little bigger or a little smaller than they usually are. I actually kind of hate that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet uses accurate sizes in the overworld because I can't even see the little buggers half the time and I'm constantly running into them. But in Sword and Shield's battlefield, come on, you could have at least made Wailord taller than a person. It doesn't even need to be full size, just don't make it look like a pool floaty or a huge plushie. Actually, while recording footage for this video, I realized that when you walk around with Wailord in the Isle of Armor, the size is actually bigger than it is during battle, and I think this is a pretty perfect size. It is nowhere near as big as the giant Wailord, but it is still a lot better than what there was before. Even when you Dynamax a Wailord, sure it gets really big, but it's still small compared to other Dynamax Pokemon. Since then, there have been fan-made mods that increase Wailord to its true size during battle as a proof of concept that it could work in the games as is. And I think that's how I would prefer it, having close to accurate size during battles, but not in the overworld because it couldn't handle it. Though Scarlet and Violet is an interesting case, as I mentioned, these games have Pokemon at more accurate sizes, both small and large. So that kind of bodes well for the future, but they also have battles that take place right in the space you encountered a Pokemon or a trainer, so it might get a little weird. I usually have Walking Wake at the front of my party and that's a pretty big dinosaur, so sometimes the camera gets a little wonky when I enter a battle with wild Pokemon, so I can only imagine how things would be with Wailord. In the past, when the battlefield was a self-contained scene, I could see it happening, and in fact it did with Pokemon Colosseum. But nowadays I am not so sure. I mean, the advantage to Wailord is that it floats, so that can always be accounted for. It can always just kind of like float above whatever mountains are in the way, if at all. But if I'm being genuinely honest, I don't think we'll ever see true-sized Wailord aside from being a fixed overworld spawn like in the Isle of Armor. You know, I realize Dondozo is a brand new Pokemon from Scarlet and Violet that is actually kind of close to Wailord. It's not as big as it, but it is like right before it in terms of the size order. In battle and in the overworld, its model is still shrunken down from what it should be in canon, but I think this is still a good representation of what Wailord could look like, because it still gets across the idea that this Pokemon is huge and is a lot bigger than others. The history of Wailord's size has kind of been really weird. I guess in certain games, things really do need to be standardized. I mean, look at Ridley in Smash Bros. Pokemon is that unique case because for a while during the 3D era, the battle format had the space, it just wasn't taken advantage of. But now with the game's changing engines and styles so frequently, nothing remains consistent long enough for Wailord to really make a splash. But again, at least we get to see really big Wailord in all of these spin-off games. We get to see full-size Wailord in new Pokemon Snap, and I think that's really cool. Though a lot of other games like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon or Pokemon Ranger still compromise a bit to make it smaller than it actually should be. And I think that's the best way. It doesn't need to be 100% accurate, just bigger than the rest of the Pokemon. It's a little funny how this really shows the disconnect between creating a Pokemon a certain way for lore reasons, but seeing how that can't always be maintained for particular reasons. There's an entire line of figurines that recreate Pokemon and human characters at 1/20th scale, and they were almost afraid to release the Wailord because it would be too huge and would cost a lot. I find the whole discussion really interesting because while there are people who do genuinely care, I feel like images of small Wailord have been weaponized as anti-Game Freak talking points when, like, trust me, a small whale is the least of their problems. And let's be honest, the worst scaled Wailord we ever saw was in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which was made by Ilka. And even though this video was mostly about the whole Wailord scale discussion, I do just want to say that I think Wailord itself is a pretty cool Pokemon. Its notoriety primarily comes from being one of the largest Pokemon in existence, but it just being a cute whale Pokemon is enough to make it a fan favorite throughout the years. I do like that it is one of those gag Pokemon that's often used in media and merchandising in a jokey way, like how it was a tag team card alongside Magikarp, but it's still often treated with respect as a marvel of nature, again like we see in new Pokemon Snap and the Isle of Armor. Those original Pixel games never made it appear as large as it really should have been, but it still held this aura of a huge creature with the sounds that it made and a bit of imagination that the games inspired. I love that it's never really one of those forgotten Pokemon, even though it's really nothing too significant. Though it is a very integral piece of the Reggie Trio puzzle, which again is its own adventure, and I love that so much, so it has a special place in my heart. My stance on the whole thing is that I'm really only bothered by the 3D models. I think it could have just been a little bigger and that would have been totally fine. But let me know what you think about Wailord and how you'd like to see it appear in future Pokemon games, because apparently size matters now. Thank you to every channel member for your continued support, especially the great Gators. Brandon Mork, Cheeseburger Lasers, Green Topaz 213, Justin R, Cosmo Zero, Meme Supreme, Michaela, Mochizuki Yoru, Nomad Nobi, Quago, Taijirai, Volity, and Pastel Blood. If you would like to support, get your name shouted out here as well as access to emotes for comments, live streams, and sometimes early videos, you can become a channel member today. You can also follow me on Twitter as well for more memes. Anyway, this has been GatorX, I'll catch you all later.
Coming soon to Nintendo Switch, Pokémon Sword and Pokémon Shield. Catch, battle, and trade never-before-seen Pokémon. Explore a new region and discover more only on Nintendo Switch. Pokémon Sword and Pokémon Shield. Games rated E for everyone.
Well, the bigger the better, right?
There's always an exception to that rule.